順転と反転、それぞれの無限を衝突させることで生成される仮想の質量を押し出す。挙式紫。
Hello everyone, 3.4 is going to be a pretty big patch, especially with the changes for our older characters. So let's see what these changes are and how impactful these changes were. So this video is going to be a bit different today, as I'm going to be using Google Sheets to keep things more digestible. I'll also not be using a script for a majority of the video, so it's going to be a lot more free-flowing. So with that out the way, let's get right into it, starting with Silverwolf. So in regards to her skill, the attack multiplier is the exact same. Now the implant rate went from 85 to 120%, which just means her effect hit rate requirement has drastically gone down. Now this is essentially what happened to her entire kit, which we'll see later, but it's as if she had her base E2 into her new kit. Now moving on to the res shred, looking at the implanted weakness, it's still 20%. Now, but it's instead 2 to 3 turns, but her prior version was also actually 3 turns due to the trace 2, but this has been implemented into her new base kit, and she got a new trace too. Now, this is also the same for all type res, where instead of 10%, it's now 13%, again due to trace 3, which is now implemented into her base kit. So yes, she did get a new trace 3. Now, there's 2 things of note for her skill, and the first is the implant. Now, while it says it prioritizes the first unit, it does, but there's still a stipulation, and that is, it actually prioritizes non-weakness elements. So using this example right here, if there is a enemy, which is Lightning, Wind, and Quantum Weak, and you have this team, such as Acheron, Black Swan, Sword of Hyacinth, there's a high chance you get the Lightning resistant shred. But you won't get the 20 res down because of this stipulation right here, which is in her current kit as well as her new one, which is really important, as I'll talk about a little bit. But moving back to the previous point, if it's Acheron, Jiaqiu, Silverwolf, and Hyacinth instead, it will instead be a 100% fire implant and you'll get the 25 res, which isn't too useful if you're using Acheron. So essentially the solution to get this 20% to work, or the 20 res shred, is to brute force enemies. But as you can see here, generally when you do try to be non-matching, which would be Silverwolf's most ideal scenario in theory, it just takes away the res or the resistance that the enemy already has. So it's technically not optimal, because essentially, why would you fight an enemy that you're not matching instead of one that you are? So essentially, generally when you're calculating Silverwolf, I don't think you should be calculating the 20 res down, which I did in my previous video where I thought she had around a 90% damage increase, but assuming you don't get this 20 res shred, it's actually closer to 70, which is in line with something like Tribby or Cypher. So yeah, that's the thing. But moving on, when looking at her ult, overall, it becomes an AoE instead of single target, which is fantastic because it means everyone becomes defense shredded now. The main thing is they kind of forgot to change the multiplier. So in 5 target scenario, as I've written here, it's a 1900% multiplier. And for reference, Acheron's is 1700, so due to this change, if this does not get changed in say version 3 or a later version, she can become a DPS. And you can probably look up some videos right now of her alongside other really strong supports. And she's really damn strong, to say the least, and can zero cycle with this change as a main DPS. But there's also a increase in the base chance, which lowers her effect hit rate requirement. But overall, I think this multiplier should get eventually nerfed. But yeah, this at this current point is really strong, and I don't think it'll stay. Now, moving on to the talent, the main thing that actually changed was instead of 8% defense shred for the bug, it's now 12%. And the base chance increased from 72 to 100. So again, greatly decreased the effect hit rate requirement. Moving to the trace 1, instead of a 65% chance, was actually really low, it's now 100% chance. So the effect hit rate requirement went from 156 to 67. So as you can see, due to these changes, you don't have to focus on effect hit rate anymore and can focus on more damage oriented substats. Now moving to her trace 2, as I mentioned, this is now in her base kit. So instead, she gets this new one where she gains 20 energy at the start of the battle and 5 energy at the start of the turn. Now this trace right here completely saves Silverwolf's kit, because this was such a huge problem with her version 1 kit or her version 1.1 kit. And essentially, you are allowed to get a turn 1 ult. For example, like Acheron, where you'll get say 2 ults in the 0 cycle, you probably would only get Silverwolf's ult for the second Acheron ult, which means you don't get an entire Silverwolf ult for an entire Acheron ult, which is really, really bad. This 5 energy at the start of the turn is also really huge, and as I've written here, it allows you to do a 2-turn ult in theory, but you do need to get 3 tutorial procs. And so this is from the ult, the skill, and the basic attack. So just know this can potentially be messed up, and you will mess it up if you're using her ult on an enemy that doesn't have defense shred, so you don't get the tutorial proc, which would be pretty bad. But assuming you just get hit once or maybe even twice, yeah, that makes up for it. Now, moving on to her Trace 3, which again was implemented into her new base kit. Now, every 10 effect hit rate, she gets 10% attack. So this just makes it easier to build her as a sub DPS. Moving to her E1, this is the exact same, but now due to her Trace 2, she now actually can do 1-turn ults, assuming you skill every single time, and can get the tutorial Lycon proc, which is super strong for something like Acheron, but is especially SP negative. Now, you can also do this in a main DPS Silverwolf, assuming they don't change this insane multiplier right here. Oh yeah, I just want to say for reference, I believe most AoE ults at this current point have a 200% multiplier. So hers currently is nearly double that of everyone else's. Now, her E2 has also been changed where it's now a 20% vulnerability. So she does have some vulnerability in her base kit via her skills. So overall, this is not like a 20% damage increase. Maybe it's like a 18 maybe. But yeah, overall, it's still much better. And also, all allied attacks now have a 100% chance to implement a bug, which is primarily useful for something like E2 Acheron, where all their teammates can now implant debuffs via all their attacks. So if we use something like Aventurine, all his follow-ups can now debuff. But while you can normally have that with the Lyco, now you don't need Lyco, and that can work with something like E2 Silverwolf. So looking at a quick summary, overall, I think it still really sucks that you can't get the -20 res shred when you are matching the enemy, which is the ideal scenario, but this just lets her brute force instead, and I think it's probably for the balance sake. But the main changes would be that she's able to do turn 1 ult, 2-turn SP neutral rotation with tutorial, and then potentially do 1-turn ults if you have E1. Now, because her effect hit rate is drastically decreased, you can build her as a sub DPS and do pretty well. The other traces, again, make your requirements much easier and let you build her as a sub DPS. Her ult, again, I do think the multiplier will get nerfed in maybe version 3 or 4, but I really don't think it'll stay. Now, if it does, it'll be super cool as you can build her as a main DPS, but again, I do think it'll be nerfed, and Talent got former Death Shred. But overall, I think she got fantastic changes, and she deserves to be in the 0.5 tier. Now, if she doesn't get her multiplier change from the ult, she can honestly be put in the sub DPS category instead of just the pure support. But again, overall, fantastic. Now, moving on. Let's look at Jingliu. So Jingliu at this current point is now a pure HP scaler and sub-attack scaler. And when looking at the base stats, looking at this first, we understand that 1 HP is equal to 2 attack. So when I will be talking about the comparison, I will be using the attack conversion multiplier to keep things more simple. So going back, if we were to multiply the base attack by 2, we actually do get a lower number than her base HP. And overall, as I've written, it is 5% or around 6% more HP that you'll get, or scaling that you'll get. So as you can see, instead of a 100% attack multiplier for her basic skill, it's now 50% HP. Again, this is completely identical as we see here. Now, going to her unenhanced skill, instead of 200% attack, it's now 150% HP. So we just multiply this number by 2, and we can see that 200 to 300% attack is a 50% damage increase. Now, this isn't a big part of her kit, but it's still pretty notable to say the least. Now, going to her Trace 2, where her original one gave her normal skill 10% action advance, this, for the most part, was pretty useless, especially if you're using a -1 setup with something like Sunday or Bunya, and this was completely useless. But now, skills give 15 energy, which is actually really good, as now, when you're in her unenhanced form and you need to do 2 skills, you now get 30 energy more per rotation out of form. And your skills, instead of giving 20 energy, they now give 35, which is really cool. Now, moving on to the skill. I'll just talk about the final multiplier, but as you can see, the original one would equal a 500% attack multiplier. and this new one, 300 HP, is equivalent to 600%. So overall, it is a 20% damage increase. Now, we will see the same trend with the ultimate, where instead of a 600% attack multiplier, it's now 360. And as you can see here, 20% damage increase, which is really nice. Now, this is where another big change comes in for her kit. Now, her talent still gives you the action advance and the 50 crit rate, but now when you get 2 syzygy stacks out of form, when you enter the form, you get 1 additional syzygy stack, so you'll be 3 out of 3, which is nice, but I'll further elaborate this a bit further in a little bit. So her attacks also now drain 5% HP instead of 4%, so it's slightly worse for some teams and potentially can be better for others. For example, if you're using something like Hyacinth, no, it would be the same. It could potentially be better for some teams in the future, I would assume. But the main change, as you can see, instead of getting 180% attack, which is a really big part of Jingliu's identity, as she was known for the massive attack buffs that she gave herself, you now get 44 crit damage every time you consume allies' HP. So, assuming you just use her skill twice, you'll cap this out, giving yourself 220 crit damage. Now, I figured this out in the previous video, but the attack percent scaling, if you were to multiply by, or anything, any stat multiplied by 1.5, you'll get the equivalent crit damage values. So essentially, it's 220 new crit damage versus the old value, which would have given you 270 crit damage value in stats. So overall, this is actually a decrease. I don't know if they'll change this, but overall, again, it's still a decrease in stats they'll get. So implement oh yeah, oops, I forgot to cover this one. Her HP trace that she has is now useful now and actually helps her out. Okay, but moving on, looking at all these changes that I have mentioned, looking at her at a single scenario, just herself as a solo scenario, she overall deals 20% more damage, which is really nice. Moving on, or going back actually, when talking about the enhanced or the additional syzygy stack that we get when entering her form, this actually puts us in a weird scenario. So as you can see here, assuming this situation, we're at 1 syzygy stack. Now, when doing another enhanced skill or whatnot, we'll go to 3 instead. But as you can see, we're at 3 and we still have the ult. If we were to ult again, we would still remain at 3 stacks. So we essentially wasted 1 syzygy stack, which really sucks. As such, it puts us in a dilemma. Of these 3 scenarios, which one do we do? If we were to do a normal skill and then transform and then ult and then enhanced skill, well, we'll waste 1 syzygy stack as we can't go to 4, but we'll keep 30 energy for the next rotation. The next one, or scenario B, if we were to do a normal skill and then use the enhanced skill, so we'll go to 2 stacks instead, and then you ult after, we'll go back to 3, there we'll get a total of 4 enhanced skills. So we'll waste 30 energy, but we'll keep an additional stack or attack. And lastly, for option C, you can, in this scenario right here, just ult and then just enhance skill. So here you'll still get 3 enhanced skills, but you don't do a normal skill. So this, I guess, technically can be good if you're trying to save SP, but can be bad if you're trying to maximize damage. But overall, you enter and leave form faster. I do believe at this current point, if they don't increase her syzygy stacks cap to 4, I believe option B will probably be most optimal, but you can probably fiddle around with option C, and it can probably make it work decent well. Now, moving on to her E1, which was, I believe, one of the 3 eidolons that they changed. The main thing is, the crit damage increase was 24 and it's now 36, which is a little nice buff. Now, prior, the second stipulation was that if there was only 1 enemy, she gets an additional 100% attack multiplier to the main target, I believe. The thing is, this was good back in 1.4 and around that version, as there were enough single targets scenarios in something like the MOC where you actually can get this attack percent multiplier. But now, being in the 3.x era, a lot of things have been multi-target, blast, or AoE, which means, honestly, this is really uncommon to have it activate. But now, instead, it's just the primary target gets an 80% HP multiplier added to them, which is really nice as this will be permanently active. And overall, it's still a nice increase, as you can see. It's a 100% attack, and it's now a 160% attack, which is a sizable increase. So overall, for the skill, this would be a 26.66 damage increase, and for the ultimate, which has a slightly higher multiplier, it will just be a 22% damage increase, which is really nice. Her E2 is still the same, and after an ult makes her enhanced skill deal more damage. Again, still dookie compared to newer E2s. Her E4 was changed to, instead of 30% attack, 100 crit damage, which is a nice buff and also allows it to work with her in a kit. E6, 50 crit damage to 20 rest span. She's already pretty oversaturated on crit damage, so this 20% rest span, which assuming she is in a solo situation, is just a 20% damage increase, which is really big and pretty common for the newer E6s as well. Now, moving to the TLDR, hopefully they change something with the stack limit and make it 4 ideally to make it play a bit better, but if they don't, then this may be a little issue where you do have to fiddle with the stack limit. Now, her new best in slot team, instead of something like Sunday, Robin, and Huohuo, it will now be something like Sunday, Trivi, and Hyacinth, which for depending on who you are can be better or worse. So overall, I just put it as a neutral or weird change. Now, overall, due to her new talent, you ideally do build her HP over crit damage, but surprisingly, if you were to use something like Fribbles, you can see that the difference between say a crit damage body is actually not too different than an HP one, although it is still a damage loss. But if you just can't get a good one for the life of you, you can just use a crit damage body and be just fine. But overall, HP substats do give slightly higher value. Now, overall for the changes, she gets a higher uptime in form and 20% overall damage increase due to the multiplier changes, and now her E1 can work in every single scenario, which is fantastic. And I do believe that for Jingliu, she will likely sit in the 0.5 or tier 1, but her performance would just completely depend on the MOC format. But overall, she's really strong, but you know, the tier 0 guys are pretty freaking strong in comparison. Now, moving to Blade, who is now a pure HP scaler instead of an attack and HP scaler. So again, in the basic attack, I put the notes where 1 attack or 1 HP is equal to 2 attack. So we'll just multiply by 2. Now, I did put the conversion, or I did the entire formula, but I'll just talk about the attack multiplier value over on this section right here. But in his previous pre-buff version, you will have a total multiplier of 432, and it's now essentially 468, but again in HP numbers. So overall, it is 8.33% damage increase, but while this is a 432% multiplier for his previous version, we don't really benefit from this attack one, and it just kind of sits there. So it doesn't really exist, but I still thought I had to mention it regardless. So it would be slightly higher than this. So yes, it will be slightly higher than 8.33% damage increase. Now, moving to a skill, this is a fantastic change. So while the HP consumption is still the same and he still gets that 40% damage bonus, he now gets a 500% taunt, which is the same as Claire's Light Cone and Yunli's Light Cone. No, Claire's ult and Yunli's Light Cone. So we can't really quantify the damage increase, but we just note that he will be getting more energy as he should be getting hit more and get more stacks as he's getting hit more. So overall, this is a fantastic change right there. Now, moving to ult cost is the same, the HP setting is still the same, but we mainly just changed the multiplier. So as you can see here, the multiplier actually is slightly higher for a total from 756% attack to 900% attack, assuming you lost the HP, as there's the little stipulation right here. But this is, I think some people may get confused on how this actually works. So it's not actually, say, as you can see right here, we can look at this one, this new multiplier. It's not actually a 90% HP multiplier or on adjacent 50%. You actually have to multiply by the 90% of the HP that Blade can potentially lose to get this max stack. So it's actually a 90% multiplier and maybe like a 45 right here, HP multiplier. So yeah, we have to keep that in mind, which is going to be pretty important as you'll see for his E1 soon enough. Now, moving to his talent, the multiplier went from, again, split scaling to pure HP. Now, overall, the attack the values is actually slightly lower, technically speaking, but I believe overall it would actually be just the same. Now, there's nothing else interesting of note for the follow-up attack. Now, moving to the moving to the Trace 3, it went from a follow-up damage bonus of 25% to the same thing, but now every follow-up can give you additional 15 energy. This is overall really good, but it can be even better in certain scenarios where he's getting hit a lot, say example fighting Hule or in Pure Fiction. Now overall, in regards to these energy changes, he can get a 4-turn ult, assuming you get 1 follow attack. And potentially a 3-turn ult if you get 1 follow-up attack and hit once, as I've written here. Now, Moving to his E1, which I guess can be a topic of contention. I don't believe it's actually as good as some people are making it out to be. So the change is that prior, or his previous version, or his unbuffed version, his ult will get this additional multiplier based on the HP values he lost. So you actually do 90% of the potential HP that Blade can lose, and you multiply by the 150% motion value, which would be 135% for the ult, which is pretty nice. But now they put it on his enhanced skill. Now here's where the issue comes in. This is based on the HPs that he's lost, but in the ult there's the stipulation where it would reset the value after the ult is used. So looking at this scenario over here, we can see the multiplier value that we would get on the right side and based on the HP that he's lost. So let's imagine the worst scenario for this, where Blade is not getting hit at all. And let's just say you had something like Brawny or Sunday just to action advance them fairly often. So assuming we want the 4 skill into ult rotation at this current point, we'll do 4 skills. So overall you lose 10, 10, 10, 10% HP. So down here, in total, you get these multiplier increases, 15, 30, 45, and 60, for an average of 37 in these 4 turns. And overall, this would just be a 13.88% damage increase in these 4 turns. So as you can see, while in theory, it can potentially be a 50% basic enhanced basic damage increase, in reality, it probably won't be that much, but it also probably won't be this little. So overall, it probably would be sitting somewhere in the middle, assuming you are getting hit a decent amount of times. So here's where the question comes in. Do we save the ult to not reset the tally so you get that 50% damage increase for the skill? I guess it would just completely depend on the scenario, as wasting energy it does mean a damage loss, but I guess technically speaking, for Blade's case, it will now be a damage increase. Overall, I think it's really weird for a hit, and I hope they can maybe fix his E1 with a future change, but at this current point, his E1 is it's a bit finicky, but it can potentially be really good, assuming you can get, say, a 90% HP loss somehow in that time, and you don't get your ult yet, so you'll just have the permanent multiply increase of 135%. Now, moving on to the TLDR for Blade. I think overall he got fantastic changes, as he got all the changes or buffs that he would ideally want. So again, he got a taunt, which is really good, but we can't really quantify the damage increase that you get from this. But we know the implications that something like this would have, such as more stacks for his follow-up or more ult energy. So right here, the 15 energy overall, it's really nice and can potentially be even better in the right scenarios. And being a non-split scaler and moving to a pure HP scaler will help his multipliers slightly. And again, the slight multiplier buffs, for example, in the ult is pretty nice. And the issue, his E1, in theory, is a 50% damage increase for the enhanced basic, but in practice probably won't be all that, unless they do make this change in version 3 or a later one. So again, this puts us in dilemma of should we save the ult and waste the energy for that damage increase? I don't really know. So overall, I think just like Jingliu, I think got some really nice changes, and it would put him in the 0.5 or tier 1 tier. And again, his performance would greatly vary based on the MOC format. I think of these characters here, they all can flip-flop around from tier 0.5 to tier 1. Besides Anaxa, I think Anaxa can solidly stay there, as he performs really well in a lot of different scenarios and is super versatile. And finally, let's move to Kafka. So her skill now detonates in a blast scenario instead of only detonating the single target. So the multiplier for the actual attack is the exact same, but again, we get 2 more detonations for the adjacent target. And in regards to a damage increase for this, yeah, 133%, really freaking good. And again, it lets her be more effective in AoE scenarios or blast scenarios. Now the ult, again, the multiplier itself is the exact same at 80%. And now prior of the version 3.4, this would actually only detonate the shock, but now it detonates all DLT. Now, it was actually a talent which let her detonate all AoE, but this was implemented into her base kit just like Silverwolf Trace 2 and 3, I believe. Now, the dot still the exact same, but as I put here, I forgot to mention, the multiplier was actually increased from 100% to 120. So this would be a 20% damage increase in the detonation damage. And as I've written here, we move the Trace 1 into the ult. Now, Moving on to the talent follow-up attack, this will be the first of many buffs to her follow-up attack. So now, instead of just an ally basic launching a follow-up attack, now after any ally attack, it'll launch a follow-up attack, which is really nice. So just more ways to trigger the follow-up. And instead of only getting one follow-up per turn, we now get one follow-up per turn with a max of 2. So you can hold 2 follow-ups potentially. Now, again, her Trace 1, this was put in her base kit, or she can now detonate all dots and move to something different, where allies with effect hit rate over 75 will now get a 75% damage bonus, which is really, or dot bonus, which is really impactful. And yes, Kafka can use this for herself. So as I've written here, this is a really big damage increase for something like Black Swan and future dot units who need to build effect hit rate. Now, getting this 75 effect hit rate from Kafka is really dang hard, as I've written here. So you would actually want to wear a effect hit rate body, so it will only take 4 effect hit rate substats. Now, if you were to use Fribbles, you can see that overall in a normal Kafka build, switching to effect hit rate body to get this damage bonus is a lot more effective and will be a pretty sizable damage increase. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I believe it was around like 15 to 20%. I believe so at least. Now, moving to her Trace 3, this changed. I guess this is technically a nerf as they didn't really increase her... No, this wouldn't be impactful at all because you're building effect hit rate anyway. Totally forgot about that. But now, after you ult, you get a follow-up or an additional follow-up use, and now follow-ups can now detonate the dot, which is pretty huge as just detonating more dot instances is just a flat-out damage increase. Now, we can't really quantify this. Hello there. So we actually can calculate it. So this is assuming a 3-target scenario for Kafka and using a rotation that looks something like this. But as we can see in version 3.4, we can see the follow-ups getting the detonate damage and the additional multiplier that we get from now being able to detonate the adjacent targets. So in total, in version 3.4, we would in theory get a total detonate damage of 1200-ish, while in version 1.2, it'd only be around 520. So yeah, that is, in total, it's actually a really big damage increase for the team. So yeah, back to the video. Moving to her E1, her talent follow-up, instead of just being a 30% dot vulnerability, after you get the follow-up attack on an enemy, now it's any Kafka attack. So if you do a skill in a blast setting or the ult in an AoE, it will now apply the dot vulnerability for all the enemies, or in the blast if you use the skill. So overall, it's still much more versatile and still a great Eidolon, as prior it would be a single target use, but now again, blast or AoE. And finally, we have the final change, and it's for Kafka, right, as well. So instead of a 25 team dot damage bonus, which is honestly pretty low, now every time Kafka does a follow-up attack, she gets 25% attack for 2 turns, or for 3 turns, and for a total of 2 stacks, so a potential 50% attack. So again, I don't believe the damage bonus was too impactful, but now she gets 50% attack, which is still okay, but like not the best. But now, assuming you are using effect hit rate body to get that damage bonus, and also using the new planar, the new dot planar set, you're going to be getting a lot of a lot of damage bonus. So getting this attack percent is actually pretty impactful for her now. Now, going to what I think about her kit and the TLDR, I think it's really good that she now gets many instances to trigger the dot, as that just means more damage for the entire team. And her skill being blast instead of single target is super huge, as it's just straight up damage increase as she can detonate more instances as well. Now, the damage percent that she gives for the team and for herself is really nice and puts her more as the enabler role. And this skill multiplier increase, technically the skill increase due to being able to hit 2 more targets, and the ult multiplier by 20% is really nice. Now, I think overall for the changes, it's perfect for Kafka, and it fixes what she needs, I believe, which is her being kind of bad in like AoE scenarios when you don't really have the ult. And the skill really helps with that, I would say. Now, I think in regards to her team, with Black Swan dot still pretty in a weak spot, I would assume even after 3.4 when these changes come out, as technically speaking, there's only 2 dedicated dot units, and that'll be just Kafka and Black Swan. But I believe once dot gets a dedicated support, or the second, or I guess primary DPS, I truly think that dot can actually become T0 with all these changes, which would be fantastic. And yeah, that's everyone. In regards to if our units are saved, I believe absolutely, as they fixed most of our characters' weaknesses, I believe, though we still have some useless traces for Blade and Jingliu. And hopefully this gets addressed in a later version, and maybe I'll cover it, who knows. If I don't, I'll make sure there is a pinned comment though. I think Silverwolf is in a great position, but I am worried about Blade and Jingliu as they are DPSs who tend to not age as well for lower invested players, and I would say Kafka also got the perfect buffs, and it's very clear that they're trying to set her up for Hysolence, the next dot whatever she is. Now, my next video would likely cover the 2 fake characters, and I might cover Phainon after. He'll get his own video maybe. But I'll say as of version 2, Archer is funny enough the strongest of the bunch, and then Saber, and then finally Phainon. If you are okay or like this type of format in the future, just let me know in the comments, as I think it should be easier to digest. I'd also like to hear your thoughts on the changes and if you think there should be more for certain characters. But overall, that would conclude this video, and I really appreciate y'all sticking by. I really try to be as fast as I can and be relatively thorough, but it still took quite some time. Again, overall, I appreciate you for sticking around, and peace.